Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today for this Azure Spring Clean session. We're going to be taking a look at taking control of your costs using Azure Cost Management. Before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of Finnops and how that plays into the wider Azure Cost Management piece. So, let's get started. So, hi everyone. First of all, thanks a lot for the organisers of this great initiative for giving me the chance to come on and talk to you about this subject, which is something that I spend quite a bit of time talking about and advocating within the community and various different user groups. Just before we get into any demos, first of all, I want to talk to you about the concept of FinOps and how that plays into what we're going to be talking about when we look at Azure Cost Management. So, first of all, I think it's important to establish exactly what FinOps is. So, at its core, really, FinOps is a cultural practice. So, think of DevOps. So, we think of DevOps in a way that enables organizations to work better and collaborate better with different types of teams. FinOps is very similar. So it's a way for teams to be able to manage their cloud costs where everyone takes ownership for their cloud usage and they're really supported by a central best practices group. It's a cross-functional team throughout IT, finance and product that work together to enable faster product delivery while at the same time being able to gain more financial control and predictability of their costs. So, what are the principles of FinOps? So, it's around the need for teams to be able to collaborate. So, just like in DevOps, the focus here is around making sure that teams have the tools and the capabilities to be able to talk to each other effectively and to be able to really deliver on what they're being enabled to do. The other key thing as well, and one of the real core principles, is delivering a good amount of business value. And that business value needs to be the real driver behind any decisions that are made from a cloud perspective. The next one is around making sure that everyone takes ownership for their cloud usage. So it's very easy, as I'm sure most people will know, for costs to get out of control very quickly in a cloud environment. And it's even harder for people to be made to take accountability and ownership of what they're spending. And this isn't always about making sure that we, are accounting for every single cent and dollar. This is around just making sure that we understand why we're spending what we're spending and seeing if there are ways that we can be smarter with our spend and do that in a better way. A lot of FinOps is around reporting as well and making sure data is available to the right people at the right time. So reports in FinOps should be very accessible. You shouldn't need to be sending them out on a regular basis. There should be a central place for people to go and to be able to access their FinOps reports and data. And they should be timely as well. So that doesn't mean what we don't want, rather, is we don't want people to be able to go to our portal on the third day of the month and see our reports, and then next month they're not there for a longer period of time. They need to be delivered on or around the same time every single period that report covers. It just makes it a lot easier for people to trust the process, make sure that people trust the data that's coming, and that's also where automation comes in as well with FinOps. It gives people a way to adopt automation, which will then make this process a lot easier for everyone involved. Excuse me. A centralized team also drives FinOps. So, unlike DevOps, where one of the models may be that you work as a cross functional collaborative team, one of the other models of DevOps is the advocacy model. And the advocacy model is really what drives FinOps. And FinOps in this scenario here means that we have a set of people responsible for driving those things to the right conclusion and really driving those practices, those best practices, and driving those efforts into the right places, into the right teams, and into the right experts. One of the other principles of FinOps is really looking at the variable cost model of cloud and that advantage that we have of being able to scale up and down horizontally and vertically and being able to take advantage of that variable cost model. And this is really where optimization comes in as one of the core principles for a FinOps team. It's around making sure that they have the data and the means and the ability to be able to take advantage of the agreement that you have with your cloud vendor, to be able to make the best use from a cost perspective of all of the tools and features that they have available to them. So I want to talk about a capability architecture really quickly. And this is around three areas. It's called inform, optimize, and operate. So first of all, inform is around giving you the visibility for the allocation and for for creating shared accountability by showing teams what they're spending and why they're spending that information. So within this pillar, there's the concept of understanding costs, and this comes in through a number of different things. So it would be a tagging strategy to start with, would be a great way to be able to understand your costs, because then you can create showback and chargeback models and reporting within your organization, and you can then map the data that you're producing from a cost perspective and map that across to the business, so the business understands exactly what's happening. It's also where you would go define any budgets, define any forecasts, and any amortization metrics that might be available if you've bought reservations, for instance, or any custom rates that are applicable to you. Those are all calculated and determined within there. And those are really the basics. There's 4 and 5 key points there really that give you I guess a real core understanding of what your costs are and where those costs are being invoked. And it's then later on in the process that we use that data to be able to make smarter decisions around exactly where our costs are, where they're coming from, and how we can keep them under control. The next element is around performance benchmark. Now, one of the key things that I always see when talking about cost is people don't know what their baseline is. So it's very difficult to make decisions around cost when you don't know what your baseline is. Because of the variable model of cloud costs, it is perfectly normal that costs can go up and down month to month or quarter to quarter. But what you're really looking for are those spikes and those anomalies, and you can identify those spikes and those anomalies by setting a benchmark. So you can create scorecards, metrics, and different KPIs, and you can benchmark both internally and against any industry peers that have some public cost data out there. And then you can apply trending and variance analysis to those, as well as looking for those spikes using machine learning potentially to really go up and really understand where normal is for you as an organization. And it's when you understand what normal is that you can move on to the optimize phase of this process. And optimize is really around empowering your teams to both identify and measure efficiently those optimizations and then make goals based on those specific opportunities. So moving on to real-time decision making or enabling real-time decision making. So this is having the data and the means there to be able to find and then remove any underutilized services. It's very easy in cloud environments to be able to have resources that are within your environment that are not doing anything because they're orphaned resources. Things have been deleted, and because they're not inherently linked together, it can be very easy to forget what has been deployed for various different methods, for various different applications. So identifying and removing those services is a really good way to save money, and identify any anomalies in your costs as well. Now, just kind of spilling over into an infrastructure as code world and a DevOps world, if you're using the right templates within there and using the right systems and processes in place to control deployments, then it should also be very easy to avoid this in the first place. But this is a good way to identify where those things have not been done. So next is around optimized usage. So this is both right sizing as well as workload management, and that workload management can mean a number of things. So it can mean the automation of services, whether they're spun up or spun down inside or outside of working hours, managing capacity based on what that application needs to do at certain times of the day. Great example is if you're an e-commerce business and you're about to run a sales event, you would know that you would potentially need extra capacity to deal with the traffic that you're expecting to your application. So you can use automation to look at those dates and say that you want extra capacity just between certain times and days to be able to effectively manage the costs that would be incurred by scaling that workload. And then you can also back it up with reactive based scaling methods as well, which are based on application performance rather than proactive, which will be what we described first, where we know that there's an event coming and we scale up ahead of time. It's also the purchasing of reserved instances as well. And it's also things like right sizing and making sure that workloads are running the right amount of compute power that they need to be able to perform the function that they need to function effectively. So those things in place give us that level of optimization. And then finally, it's around operate. So it's around defining and executing different processes that then enable the goals of technology, finance, and the business to be achieved successfully. And the pillars that sit within Operate are around optimize rates and your agile plans to the business. So optimizing rates is making sure you use things like the marketplace. Sometimes it's cheaper to use a marketplace to procure and run and buy software than it is to actually run something completely separately installed yourself with a license you already have. So think about things like that. And that comes into license optimization as well. Making sure you balance the use of various rate types and making sure you select discounts that match flexibility. So reserved instances is a great example of this, and without going into too much complex detail, this would be the difference between buying a one-to-one mapping reservation versus buying a flex reservation that can apply to a family of virtual machines rather than just an individual size itself. Pre-purchasing capacity, obviously reservations like we've just been talking about, and then volume discounts as well. You know, it may be that in your agreement that you have the ability to make use of volume discounts. So this is where the architecture practice can really help in here and say, if we're going to do this certain task in different applications, then we need to use this service because the more of it we use, the cheaper that becomes to us on a per unit basis, rather than people using different technology to do the same thing. That's obviously one of the benefits of the cloud, but it can also be one of the disadvantages as well, especially when it comes to making use and taking use of things like volume discounts. And then last as well, just like DevOps practices, a lot of Agile practices, this is exactly the same in Finnops. They're born out of the exact same practices and the exact same ethos. And that's around creating a good communication strategy, a good framework that enables decisions to be made, that leads and aligns with those business drivers. It's around making sure that there are ongoing reviews with any key stakeholders, as well as tracking and trending information as it comes through over time as well. And it's also around making sure that you can make mini business cases as your business evolves to be able to do various different things, such as providing more accurate costs for running certain applications as you want to go through and deploy those within your environment. So it's very, very important that you use those things to be able to help with those key things that we've aligned up with there. So just to review very quickly, the key areas here are inform, where you get the ability to have visibility and create shared accountability for what teams are spending and why they're spending it. It's also the ability to optimize, which empowers your teams to both identify and measure efficiencies within your environment and align them based on goals. And then finally, as well, defining and executing processes that enable the goals of the business that is within the area of operate. So, next thing is to dive directly into the tool itself. So let's go have a look at Azure Cost Management. So first of all, I'm going to go through some of the areas within here, and then we're going to have a look at some of the data in more detail and see how you can look at the various different bits and pieces within here. So first of all, the important thing to notice is that, like everything else in Azure, this is very much built on a scope view. So You can look at management groups within here. You can look at subscriptions, and you can also look at resource groups as well. You can go down to quite low level of detail in here as well. So we're looking at a subscription in this case. I'll come on to some of the preview features that are around shortly and talk about some of those, because obviously that's quite a fast moving world. So we'll look into some of those in a bit later. Cost analysis is where we'll come back to later on, and this is where we really see the bulk of the cost data and can analyze exactly what we're spending and where that is being spent. And quite a lot of people get confused by a lot of the data on here, so I want to come back and make sure that we do this justice and really talk about some of the options that you can have in here and how this works. So this is something that we'll come back onto. Next in the list is around cost alerts. Now, cost alerts are really, really good because it means that when you get to a certain point of spend or a percentage, as you can see in this case, then we can send alerts to various people via emails or via different action groups that are set up in Azure Monitor. So this gives us the ability to keep a track of those costs really early and do something about them if we start breaching alerts. They're very similar in how they work to budgets, just a little bit different. So if we go create a new budget in this example, so I can show you what this looks like. Budgets work a little bit differently, and we'll talk about how and why a little bit, but we can create filters for those budgets in here. And filters can be any one of these different types of properties. One of the most important ones, I think, that is very useful is tags. So don't forget, we can use tags to enforce all kinds of different things. So be what environment that sits in, what workload it's part of, your workload is part of, and what cost center it belongs to, for instance. So you could go to cost center and you can look at the tags that it will go off and load the values of the tags that you have within here. And you can go set a filter based on exactly what that looks like. So you can pick any one of the different things from here. So we'll still with cost center, and we'll just use this as an example. And one of the things you'll notice is now that the graph is resizing and redrawing on the right hand side. And what this is doing is it's going to give us a view of the data that it has collected so far. Why that's important is it gives you a view into what your budget is likely needed to be, so that you set an appropriate budget based on the spend that you've consumed so far. So in here you can see that the darker green bars that we have are our actual costs, and the lighter green ones that we have are our forecasted costs. So we can see here we have a cost for last month, the maximum in the past 7 months, and the maximum monthly forecast going forward. So then we need to enter a name for our costs. So we can just call this demo in this example, and then we need to give it an amount. So you can see that there's some figures suggested at the top there, which are also suggested down here as well. And they're recommending 28 as our budget. So we can set that. You can see that the dotted line moves up there to state where our budget is. And when you click on next, we can then set different alert conditions. So we can now say that when our forecast reaches, for instance, 90% of our budget, which would be £25.20, you can see it's drawn a new blue dotted line on the chart to show where that is. Then we want to go off and we want to do a budget alert in our action group. And you can go off and manage and create action groups and look at what that is separately. And then you can also set some recipients to come up via email as well. And then you can go off and you can create any ones of those within there. So we can also come in, let's just set that back. We can also come in and set actual, for instance. So when our actual goes above 75%, and you can see that's done a slightly separate line. Again, we can get different types of alerts based on exactly what's happening. And we can put an email address in, and we can save that. It takes a few hours for the evaluation to begin, as it says at the bottom there. So I'm not going to create one now because we won't be able to go see it. But that gives you a really good method straight away to be able to go in and really manage and understand your costs and understand when you're spending more than you need to. But the fundamental thing to remember there with what we talked about so far is that's all based upon and built around the ability to use tags in the example I showed you. And I really do think tags are the best way to manage what your costs are and attributing various different costs to different types of workloads, cost centers, environments, and any other sort of business property that you want in there as well. If we come into advisor recommendations, so all this screen shows us in here is any Azure Advisor cost recommendations. So if you're used to using Azure Advisor, this is the exact same screen. There is no difference to what you would normally see. And this really just shows you some information within here that you can go into, look at in a bit more detail, and it will tell you what things you can do to save money within your environment. So there's some examples in here that they recommend that we can save money by buying a quantity of 7 standard DS2 v2 virtual machines in UK South, and that will save us potentially $7,000 a year based off pay-as-you-go costs. So you can go in and you can go action those if you want from here and various different things, but they're all showed within one place. Now, if you wanted to go see those reservations and any hybrid use benefit details in one view, then you can come into here and they will be shown within this screen. And this is where you can also add brand new reservations as well, providing you have the appropriate rights. They are all showed within here to be able to go off and buy whatever it is that you need. Okay, so just looking at some of the settings that are in here. So when you go on to the first settings within here, so you can go through and you can get to some of the other screens that we've talked about and manage some of the things that are related to cost management. We've talked about a number of these things already. We can go into exports and we can also set up scheduled exports of data to a storage account. So I can go into add within here, and when I'm in here, I can set up different metrics that I want to look at, and I can set a specific export of the data within here when I want that to start, and I can go send that to a specific storage account and container and directory if I wanted, and then I can go get those files manually. I can go pull down those CSV files that are produced automatically. It's a good way to be able to get the granular data that you need without having to come into here all the time and export the data. So for anyone that uses AWS as well, you can add a connector into AWS so that you can see your cloud costs for AWS within Azure Cost Management as well. So if you are running a multi-cloud environment, for example, then this would be a great way to be able to have a single pane of glass for your cloud costs within one place and give you the ability to really look and interrogate them through one single pane of glass rather than going to different portals to view different information that would no doubt be presented slightly differently and in various different ways. So we're going to go firstly into cost analysis, and then we'll have a look at the preview in a little bit. So first of all, just remembering the scope that you'd selected, you can go change the scope within here as well if you want to. It's something that you can put into a different place if you want. And then you can change the view, which changes a number of the different details within here. But what we're going to do is we're going to try and use the data that we have just on this one screen to try and answer some fundamental questions about cloud costs, which are pretty common ones. So those questions would be, why have my costs increased? And what am I spending the most on month to month? And how much are my costs increasing over time? So The first thing that we need to do is, at the minute, we're looking at monthly data. So you can see at the top there that we're looking at March in 2022. There's no filter on this at all either. And you can also see that we're looking at accumulated data. So rather than do that, I'm going to say that I want to first look at daily data. And we're going to change this into a column stats chart. So one of the first things that you can see here, excuse me, is that the costs are relatively stable throughout the course of the day, throughout the whole of March. So the predicted costs are due to be, in and around £80 to £90 for the most part. There's a few near the end that drop below, but it's fairly consistent. So one of the things that this can tell us, I guess straight away, is that we're not expecting any big changes. Obviously, things get deployed and deleted all the time in cloud environments, so it's an ever-changing target. But to be able to look at that prediction a little bit more closely, what we can do is we can go back and say, let's have a look now at the last quarter's data. So this is just going to go off and redraw this information for us. And what we should get, again, is a very similar view of the data, just with a wider time frame. So we're just going to change this back to monthly again, because we know the costs are broadly going up. That's obviously something that we're expecting. And what we can see is that actually in this environment, the costs are starting to go down. So over the past quarter, the costs have gone down to from just over 2,600 to just below 2,400. So it's not a huge dip, but a dip all the same. Now, this doesn't really show us a great deal because it's not particularly coming back in enough data. So we can go back even further and we can look at the last 12 months. Now, it's going to take a little while to draw. One of the things you will notice and get used to with Azure Cost Management is, yes, it is an incredibly powerful tool, but retrieving the data that you are querying for, the more data you query, obviously, the more that's going to take to bring through, and the longer those queries take. So just be patient. It does come back. It's very, very good, and you can see that the data has now come back for the past year. So one of the things that we can see here is a couple of interesting points, and we can start to look and interrogate some of this in a bit more detail and see what the reason was for some of these drops in costs here, and then a subsequent increase in costs at the other side. So you can see that in July last year, July 2021, we went from 2,500 down to 1,500. So we shaved off broadly £1,000 in cost. So what we're now going to do is we're going to apply a group. And what we're going to do is we're going to group, first of all, we're going to group by service name. And again, this is going to go off and pull the data back in a very similar way that it has done before. But the difference this time is it's going to be grouped together by the amount of spend across the various different types of services within Azure that we have. And what that's going to do is that's going to enable us at the very outset to have a look at where we potentially need to be looking and look at where those costs have potentially changed. So you can see by looking at the different colors, and so let's just take others off for now, so that you can see without adding the other costs on that there is quite a big change that might be responsible for some of the costs that we've seen there. One of the ones that you can see is virtual machines has gone from £285 down to 203. So there's a little bit of a saving there. You can also see that VPN gateway costs have gone down from 216 down to 102. So there's some changes there as well. And you can do that between all of the different bits and pieces that you're looking at here and see exactly where those costs might be. You can see the app service costs, for instance, have gone from 502 to 386. Now, one of the things that is worth bearing in mind is when you look at everything individually on face value, um, they might not seem like huge savings, but when you add up those £100 to £200 a month differences over a number of different services, you're very quickly up into the thousands of pounds in either savings or increases in costs. So it's really, really important to make sure that you keep a tally of that information and keep your eye on, the bits of data that you're looking at, because that will give you an understanding as to exactly where, some of those changes in costs are coming. So let's now have a look at the other side, because there's some really clear differences here, excuse me, as to where some of these increases are coming between September and October. So the first one you can see in September, virtual machine costs were £492. In October, they almost doubled to 878. So there's quite a big increase, which is responsible for some of that broader increase there from 1,800 to around 2,500. One of the other things that we can see if we look at the data a bit more closely is that log analytics has gone from £61 to £170. That's again an increase. That's more than doubled. So again, just like I was talking about just then, some of those costs have started to go up and up, and that's where you can see some of the big costs that have come into play. Now, the next one to have a look at is the resource. So we've looked at service type there, and that gives us a good idea of as to where some of those costs have gone. Excuse me. But when you start to look at resource, you can look at a resource level. So again, taking off others, you can see here that all of a sudden, one of the big differences in costs here is this node pool for Azure Kubernetes service. In fact, it's both node pools for Azure Kubernetes service. So pool 1 and pool 2. So you can see that in August, those costs did not exist at all. And in September, those costs did exist. And you can see that the second node pool has also scaled up further into October as well. So instantly here, you can see that the costs that are being added on is £172 and then £290. And it kind of stays around about where it needs to be there. But that highlights the exact thing that we're talking about within here is very quickly, I've been able to identify that between August and September, a good chunk of my increase, so 172 plus 76, so very nearly £200 increase has been through the deployment of AKS. So I know instantly that that is one of the reasons for my increase, and I've done that using some of the data that is here. One of the other things you can do with tabular data, so we can look at this data in a tabular format as well. And I've seen this being done a number of different times, is when you look at the tabular data and when you download that tabular data, you can see the download button at the top that's just grayed out at the minute. You can see and you can look at that data in something like Excel or any other analysis tool, and you can look at the data at a resource level on a month by month basis and see what the increases and decreases are over time. And you can create a pivot table around that data, so you can see data that's appeared month to month and data that's disappeared. So a good example is the workspace, the node pool here that we were talking about. So you can see that it comes in towards the end of last year and those costs are there, and by comparing the data and the grouped months of information that's here, you can see when those resources came into existence, when they were deleted, if there's things that have gone, and also the increase in certain resources over time as well. So it's very important to use that information to be able to kind of filter through and see exactly what's what as you go through the life of a application. It also shows you the resource group name as well in there. So you can see there's very much an AKS cluster within there, and you can see the different node pools that have been deployed and such like. So you can then go off and download that information, as I was saying. So you can download that in an Excel format, or you can download that as a CSV. If you're looking at a chart view, you can download a PNG graphic of that to be able to go look at, again, information a little bit more. And that will give you the information you need to go forward and see exactly what's what. So, quite quick whirlwind tour around this section, but that really does answer those fundamental questions of why did my costs increase and what resources were responsible for those increases. So I just want to take you into some of the preview features that are available at the minute. So we can load up into the preview portal and see some of this information. And you can also check out the Azure service updates blog as well, where you will find out information about all these things which are coming. And you'll be able to look at various different bits and pieces to be able to see how that works in your environment and see if it's something that you are looking to use in the future. So some of the things that are coming here are different types of menus, by the looks of it, and different views of information. So you can go off and look at those. But if we go into the cost analysis preview, you can see it's very, very different to what we've been looking at. The data is a lot higher in level in a lot of ways. So I'm looking at a scope level of the subscription, and I can go click into resources here, and what this will show me is we'll go off and load again granular tabular data over time of exactly what information we have. So you can go see all of the different bits and pieces within here, and the data still appears to be loading. Yeah, there it is as it all comes to life. So you can see some of this information and see service tier information within here as well, and any other totals. One of the other things that's in preview that I really like is anomaly detection. So if we go on to see insights, I can look, and unfortunately there's none here to see, but you can see that this provides any insights of your cost and usage patterns, along with any recommendations to increase savings over the past 60 days. So basically it's saying that the costs from March to 30/11 are within the expected range based on the average daily cost during the last 60 days. If that wasn't, it would flag an anomaly in here, and it would basically come up and show me with some recommendations as to what I could do to prevent that from becoming a problem within my environment. So it's a way for me to look at those costs, and it's a way for me to understand what those costs are, while that anomaly is being detected before it becomes a problem days or weeks or maybe even months down the line. So there's lots of different things that we can do within there to be able to see that information. And then just to show you that opening this up, it does give you some information in here where you can see the services that have made up those costs. So VMs and bandwidth, inter-region bandwidth in here are the two main drivers of that cost. So with that then, so first of all, thank you for joining me, and hopefully you found that really useful. It's quite a quick tour around, and there's not a huge amount to show you, to be perfectly honest. But what I did want to get across there, because it's a tool that is not used all that frequently and certainly not all that in depth, is I wanted to be able to show you exactly what the tool is capable of doing and show you that it has the ability to answer those granular questions on cost. If you want to go in and set up some of those different views that we looked at, you can also save them in the future. So that if you wanted to go look at the same data again in the future, you can go off and do that, and you can go off and look at that. Share that link to others within your organization that have access as well. And again, if you have any cloud consumption in AWS, for instance, like we were talking about, you can go off and attach it into Azure Cost Management as well. So all your cost management is in one place. So with that, again, just want to say thank you for watching. Hope you found that useful. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.